Bienvenidos to the Bronze Titan on YouTube. I'm your host, Benjamin Ramos. I'm an independent journalist and longtime Cuba Solidarity activist based here in New York City. And once a month, I'll be bringing you a podcast from the international movement to end the U.S. blockade against Cuba. On today's segment, we have an international segment. I'm going to be speaking with Alison Bodine of the Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, the VCSC, about their amazing work for Cuba Solidarity up in our neighbor to the north. So welcome to the Bronze Titan, Alison.
Thanks, Ben. It's so good to see you after many years. I really appreciate your work and I look forward to this conversation.
Absolutely. Audience, all full transparency, Alison and I are ancient friends who have worked together around Cuba stuff for a very long time. So it's wonderful. This is a bit of a reunion for me and Alison. So I am so happy to have you on, Alison. We need some international voices on this. So let's before we begin everything, let's talk a little bit about VCSC. What is Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba? What is all of that about?
So yeah, VCSC formed in 2004 in responses to President Bush's escalated campaigns against Cuba and further threats to the Cuban Revolution. And that was kind of the impetus for people in Canada, in Vancouver specifically, so all the way on the Pacific Coast, to want to organize more coordinated actions, more consistent actions in solidarity with Cuba. And since then, VCSC has been part as a member of the Canadian Network on Cuba, which is our kind of umbrella network here in Canada, has been organizing in defense of Cuba's sovereignty and self-determination, and also in support of the Cuban revolutionary government and the Cuban Revolution. And since I moved to Canada, is kind of how I found out about Cuba. I grew up in Colorado. Cuba wasn't talked about much. And when I came to Canada, that's actually when I met people that had been to Cuba, because so many Canadians go to Cuba every year. And I think that really was also just an excellent grounds to organize a solidarity campaign and to really commit ourselves to talking more about Cuba, because so many people here support Cuba and have traveled there. And so VCSC got involved in fighting against the escalated policies of President Bush at the time, and then has continued ever since, especially doing a lot of work, of course, in defense of our 5 Cuban heroes who were released now well over 10 years ago, which is really wild to think about. But that victorious and successful campaign and, very similar work to what happens in the United States. Humanitarian aid campaigns, political events, cultural exchanges, brigades to Cuba, all of these things.
Wow, Alison, do you remember those Cuban 5 days? That's when you and I, you were here at IFCO. We were all running around shouting for Fernando and Rene and Geraldo. It's been, it has been. It's close to almost 10 years that they've been out, right? We're creeping up to 10 years.
Oh yeah, it's really wild. I mean, what a victory we have too. And I think that's part of when we're involved in other campaigns for political prisoners or this continued work against the criminal U.S. blockade. We have to remind ourselves that there can be victories. And we see that every time, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever and see the tweets from Gerardo Hernandez, who's now doing his work as leading the committees in defense of the revolution in Cuba, or talk to Fernando, who's now the head of ECAP. You think these men were once prisoners in the United States, and an international campaign, along with the pressure of the people of Cuba, freed them. And so we can have victories. We can win.
Yep. I guess it's in whatever language you say, whether it's English or Spanish in the U.S. or in Canada, sí se puede. Sí se puede. So, Alison, tell us a little bit about, the whole perspective of being in Canada and doing Cuba solidarity work, because there's a lot of people that say, well, doesn't Cuba have normalized relations with Cuba? Why are you guys getting involved? If all this stuff is taking place in the U.S. and it's all about U.S. propaganda and U.S. policy, why is Canada getting involved?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Like I said, there are a lot of people from Canada that travel to Cuba, and people see Cuba very much in a different light in some ways than people in the United States do, because it is legal to travel there. You can spend all of your money there. You can use your credit cards sometimes. It kind of depends. But the extraterritorial implications of the US blockade apply in Canada. And the government of Canada, although they have normal relations with Cuba, hasn't done very much to really challenge the blockade. Some prime ministers have in the past made statements, or, at the vote at the United Nations, Canada definitely stands with the vast majority of the world, basically every country in the whole world, in condemning the US blockade each year. But those are just words. And in the end, we have a situation where Canada often, does what it can to kind of maintain those relations and those business relations, but then also spread misinformation and disinformation about Cuba. So, for example, we have in the last few weeks, under this intensified maximum pressure campaign from Trump that is attempting to strangle the people of Cuba, we have the government of Canada issuing travel warnings, saying people don't go to Cuba, it could be dangerous, we're sending flights to evacuate you. In contrast to people in Cuba, Canadians in Cuba at the time, coming back and saying, oh no, everything was peaceful, it was fine. We maybe got moved to a different hotel because they're trying to conserve resources, but we were still having a really good time and a good vacation. And I actually just read a report saying that people in Canada are still trying to get to Cuba to continue their vacations there, even under these, despite the travel warning from the government of Canada, and despite the fact that every major Canadian airline has canceled flights to Cuba. Other countries are continuing to fly to Cuba. They found workarounds, ways to refuel, get more oil. But Canadian Airlines all decided to stop their flights. And one of them just delays flights all the way to the end of October. So I think these hostilities creep in, and that's the importance of a solidarity movement. But it also means that hopefully we have a lot of traction as solidarity activists to really talk to people kind of at a different level than some ways than in the United States, because we can talk to people that are like, oh yeah, I have this friends in Cuba, or I stayed with this family, because they've all felt the warmth of Cuban hospitality and society, and they've been to Cuba and heard that Cubans have a multitude of opinions and ideas, and kind of been able to see it for themselves. So I think it's really important within solidarity here that we continue to promote tourism, actually, that we encourage people to travel to Cuba, which is a bit different than being in the US, and then that we do more to pressure the government of Canada. So for example, Canada, under pressure from labor unions and people here in Canada, did announce that they were going to send food aid to Cuba during this difficult time. But Canada also is an oil producer, and Canada could send oil, and they haven't offered to do that. So I think there's a lot more that we can do to fight all the extraterritorial implications of the US blockade, and demand that Canada not only condemn the blockade, but really use Canadian law to say we're not going to enforce the blockade here in Canada. We're going to let companies in Canada trade directly with Cuba. So there's lots of examples that I've learned. Just one more thing. Something that I've traveled to Cuba from the US many times, and you just kind of assume like, oh, I can't use my credit card, it's not going to work. But for people in Canada, oftentimes their credit cards do work. They can do like normal financial transactions, but sometimes those transactions don't work. And then people in Canada actually learn that their bank is really intertwined with the US, that the US is, enforcing the blockade and implications of the blockade on their credit card, even though it's a purely Canadian bank. And that's exposed some of these hidden ways that the blockade impacts just people traveling. And I think it's important we have a solidarity movement when those people come back and they say, oh, that didn't work. And you're like, well, did you know that's because of this criminal policy, and we can do something about it?
It's powerful to think about how another country's policy is directly linked in some way with a form of adjacency with U.S. policy. It makes us really understand how the U.S. government has their fingers everywhere. You've blown my mind with this whole thing of how many airlines are saying that they're not allowing any trips to Cuba. They're canceling Aire Cubana, which is all over Cuba. People are not able to travel. You said, what is it? One airline pushed it all the way back to October?
Yeah, they said they're not going to do flights until October. And there were, Canada is much smaller than the US, but there were at least daily flights especially from airports in the east, and especially in the winter, from Montreal, from Toronto to Cuba. All of those are canceled. There's not a single flight. All airlines have canceled, saying that it was oil, but it's a little bit hard to believe it could only be oil because, like I said, other airlines are still flying to Cuba. I think, flights from Miami are still going to Cuba. So what's the excuse of these airlines in Canada? I think it has to be a mix of economic, but also some political pressure, because then the government of Canada can keep enforcing their narrative that Cuba is somehow dangerous, which we'd actually seen building over the last few years. Major media sources in Canada, writing longer reports about some tourists' bad experiences in Cuba, or trying to paint Cuba in a bad light, which is just ridiculous because Cuba's the safest place I've ever traveled by a long shot.
And it's insane because, Allison, there's so many people. There's a strong Cuban diaspora in Canada. Now they can't go see family. They can't travel to their own homeland. I mean, wow. Just thank you for sharing that with us. It's so powerful. I'm going to throw a curveball at you, Allison, because you mentioned really quickly a Canadian network for Cuba. Tell us a little bit about that Canadian network. Is it like a sister network to the national network on Cuba here in the United States? And what does that network do?
Yeah, definitely. So I believe the Canadian network in Cuba has been around for a similar time to the national network on Cuba, but sometime in the late 90s, I believe, is when it was formed. And it basically is a network of all the Cuba Solidarity organizations across Canada. Quebec has its own network because Quebec considers itself, a separate nationality within Canada. So they have La Table de Concertation, it's Solidarity con Cuba. Oh man, I just mixed Spanish and French. My French has not improved since moving here. But La Table, as we say it in short, so they have their work and they work together with a Canadian network on Cuba, and we all, coordinate campaigns together. So right now there's a campaign, of course, to collect funds. There are shipping containers leaving from the eastern part of the country to Cuba with things like generators, and basically solidarity organizations are asked to affiliate with a network to help coordinate the work. And that has been, a successful, definitely endeavor since its formation. And so VCSC here in Vancouver and Friends of Cuba Against U.S. Blockade Vancouver, which I also work with, are both members of that organization. It's called the Canadian Network on Cuba, or the CNC.
Wonderful. Will there be, in our last podcast, we were talking to our brother Ike from Cuba C. There is a, excuse me, there is a solidarity conference taking place this weekend, the weekend of the 14th and 15th. How is Canada involved? They keep saying it's an international conference. How is Canada involved? Are you coming? Other people from VCSC? What's happening?
Yeah, so the U.S.-Cuba Normalization Conference coalition that's organizing this conference in March, coinciding with the visit of the Cuban Federation of Women and other Cubans to take part in the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations. This conference and the group that organizes it, U.S.-Cuba Normalization, has really been a successful initiative to bring together groups in Canada and the United States. I didn't really emphasize it before, but I think as people living in Canada, the majority of whom live very close to the U.S. border, we're talking within, 100 miles at most of the U.S. border, like 80% of Canada's population. So I think it's really important we support the work in the United States. Like, as people in Canada, we should do whatever we can to build a broader and more united movement, especially in the U.S., because that's where the real change to U.S. policy is going to come from. So part of that means supporting U.S. organizations and hopefully working together to strengthen our cross-border work and campaigns. And this has happened concretely for years, for example, with the Pastors for Peace Caravan, which for years would travel north into Canada and then get to Cuba that way when it wasn't possible to go through Mexico. So there's been important, cross-border coordination and solidarity for decades. But the U.S.-Cuba normalization, since 2017, I think was when the first conference took place, has tried to bring together members of the Canadian Network on Cuba, the National Network on Cuba in the U.S., and then other groups in both countries to really try and build a more international movement. And so I'm definitely going to be there, coming with a few other people from here in Vancouver, and hopefully others from Toronto and Montreal. We'll be able to go in person. If not, it's going to be online. So if you go to actionconference.org, most of the discussions are taking place on Saturday, March 14th, and they will be live streamed and on Zoom. So if you can't make it to New York City, then I hope people will join that way. And we'll be talking about campaigning that people on both sides of the border can definitely participate on and build. We'll be strategizing together about material aid campaigns, talking about travel brigades, the ones from here in Canada, the Che Guevara Brigade of the Canadian Network on Cuba, and then a group called the Calixto Garcia Brigade that goes in December will both be discussed and are both open to people from the U.S. joining, even though they're brigades that originate here in Canada. So I'm really looking forward to this year's conference. It's coming at a critical time for building solidarity, and I'm looking forward to exchanging in person. I know I said people can participate in Zoom, but I think, nothing has really replaced getting in a room together and debating about the best campaigns to implement, learning from each other's experiences. So I'm looking forward to that this weekend at the CUNY Graduate Center.
Alison, for those of you who don't know the Canadian map, Vancouver is basically on the west coast, right above the west coast of the United States. So I'm just wondering, Alison, are you in a lot of contact? Is VCSC in a lot of contact with like California and Seattle and all of that West Coast Cuba solidarity work? Since you guys are technically way closer to them than they are. Alison is making the effort. She is coming from another country and another coast all the way to come back home to New York, because New York was home for Alison for a few years. Yeah. So is there interaction a lot with the West Coast side, and what does that work like?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing about organizing in Canada is I've learned that sometimes cities like Seattle can feel a lot closer than cities in a province that's even directly adjacent, just because of the lower population in Canada, I think. And so we often, especially are in collaboration with groups in Seattle. Seattle is only a 3-hour drive, including the time to cross the border. So it's significantly close. To get to Alberta, to Calgary, for example, I think would take at least a day's drive, probably 12 hours or something. So talking about, I think, a lot of necessity. So we've done rallies together that not only during the occasion of the Pastors for Peace Caravan, whose routes along the West Coast would often start in Vancouver and then go south, but also just other opportunities. There's an area called Peace Arch Park that's a bit of a no man's land between the two countries. So you can go there from either side and not officially cross the border. So we've had successful rallies there, which enable us to outreach to both people from Canada and the US that are stuck in their cars in the long border lines. And we've also, for years, Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, and, we'll continue organize something called the Che Guevara Conference. And this was a by every 2 years conference in which we discussed the ideas of revolutionary Che Guevara and how they apply to today, and talked about Cuba solidarity. And because we were here in Canada, we were able to bring much easier speakers like Dr. Elena Guevara, Che Guevara's daughter, or people such as, people from ECAP, people from Cuba's government. It's harder to get visas these days. It's for even coming from Cuba to Canada. Like, we've heard a lot more visa denials, but it's still significantly easier in most cases than Cubans getting visas to freely travel in the United States, especially now. So, we should take full advantage of that. And we'd organize conferences, and people from the US, and especially from Seattle or Portland, would come up because it was an easy way to exchange with Cubans when you weren't able to go all the way to the island. So I think it's important we continue building. Sometimes, people refer to this whole area as the Pacific Northwest, and there's a lot of synergy, I would say, between how the cities kind of feel. So I think we can learn from one another and definitely continue to build those bonds and support our work around here. And the Seattle-Cuba Friendship committee has been excellent to work with. And then Portland has a growing Cuba Solidarity Committee there as well.
Wonderful. Well, Alison, as we're closing out, first of all, if you come to the conference this weekend, you're going to get to meet Alison and the contingent that's coming from Canada and folks from VCSC. But where can we get more information on all of the groups you're talking about, just in case there are people who are transitioning to Canada, people who are going to college in Canada that are like, wait a minute, there's organizations that could be doing some type of contact work. So what's all the social media? What's all the websites?
Yeah, so I really encourage people. I first came to Canada because I was going to school. So yes, it definitely happens. Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba's website is vancubasolidarity.com. And then all the social media handles are VanCuba and then _VCSC. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you can find us that way. And then you can find all the links to the Canadian Network on Cuba or other organizations across Canada doing organizing. There are regular rallies that take place in multiple cities across Canada, so you'll find those on VCS's social media as well. Because the kind of Puentes de Amor call for monthly actions for Cuba, most major cities in Canada have continued that actually, so have the last Sunday of every month dedicated to a car rally or a rally at the U.S. consulate against the U.S. blockade on Cuba. In Vancouver, for example, it'll be 5 years that we've had actions every Sunday coming up on the last Sunday in March. So you can, any major city in Canada you're in, you can probably find something happening for Cuba. And I definitely encourage people to get involved.
And Alison is not exaggerating. I think a lot of us here in the U.S. have to really look at Canada, the Canadian example, because especially you guys, the monthly things that have been going on for Cuba, when so many of us here in the U.S. have tried to start that and have not been able to keep it up with capacity. Canada has so much on us for years, and it started, I feel like, with the 5. There was always something happening monthly for the Cuban 5, and then as the 5 were released, as the Cuba Solidarity movement started re-evolving and re-changing, the Canadians kept up that look at the social media, folks, and you'll see the flyers that go back years of the monthly activities. So U.S., we got to step it up because Canada's kicking our butts on that one. So, okay. Mi gente, this has been your March edition of the Bronze Titan on YouTube. Thank you to our sister, Alison Bodine, for speaking with us today. You can meet Alison this weekend at the conference. Our Canadian comrades are going to be there, and you need to be there. So please sign up, actionconference.org, right? Actionconference.org?
Yeah, you got it. And yeah, thank you so much for keeping up this work. You know, the world needs Cuba now more than ever, and it's something that Reverend Lucius Walker would always remind us of. And I, every few days have found myself thinking of him, because it's not Cuba that needs us. Cubans know what they're doing. They're going to fight back. They're going to persist, but we need Cuba. We need it. So we got to fight.
We need the example of Cuba to inspire us. And thank you for re-inspiring us with the memory of our incredible Reverend Lucius Walker. Yes. Lucius. Oh, thank you for giving me that memory, because I miss Lucius. We all miss Lucius, especially in this period of time. It would be amazing to have his perspective on what's going on. And I think it would always just be the simple perspective of we continue to fight. We go out there, si se puede. Just rounding back up to what you said about the campaigns to free the 5. We have the power to end this blockade, and we will do it. So, all right, YouTube commercial time. If you like this podcast, please like it, share it, click the bell, subscribe to our channel, click the bell so that you can get all the notifications so that you can catch our next segments. I've been pretty good in 2026. It's March and I've given you 3 podcasts, and I'm probably going to be on Saturday at the conference taking little vignettes and recording little bits and pieces so that there's a post-conference podcast built, put together based on a lot of people's impressions. So you'll probably see Alison again. Como siempre, familia, Cuba sí, bloqueo no.
Cuba sí, bloqueo no. Un abrazo.